and welcome to Choice Conversations. I'm your host, Chris Stefanick. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Jake DeSillis. He's the host of the Voluntary Life podcast, he's an entrepreneur, and he's the author of the new book, Becoming an Entrepreneur. Jake, welcome to the show.
Hi, Chris. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Today we're going to talk about financial freedom, financial independence, a popular topic on your podcast, Voluntary Life. Before we get into all of that, I'd like to know more about you, what your journey was to get here. So how did you become interested in entrepreneurship and financial independence and having personal freedom in your life?
Well, I guess it started a long time ago. I mean, I had no clue really what I wanted to do in terms of a job. I never really wanted a job. I was never very keen on the idea of working for other people. And so in my 20s, I tried various things. I did a lot of study in university and postgraduate study, and I did some work as a consultant in Berlin and in London. But I never really wanted to have a career and sort of work in a big company or anything like that. And I saw, this is in the sort of late 90s, I saw a lot of people starting businesses, people my age. I mean, that was the real time of the sort of first big internet boom. And it was a really good time for people to get into entrepreneurship. And it was very much in the news, and there was a lot going on. The economy was doing really well. So I just figured, well, if that's a possibility, I mean, I'd never really been around that much entrepreneurship, but I could see that it was something that people sort of who didn't look to be that much cleverer than me were doing. And I figured, well, if they can do it, I can do it too.
Right.
So I started a business. I did a PhD, and when I finished that, I left university and started a business in 2000. And that was really. I didn't really know what I was doing in terms of business when I got started. I'd spent time in university, which is not a good place to learn anything about business.
Right.
And so I just sort of learned by doing.
Great. Your primary driver, I guess, was not really wanting to work for somebody else because that just didn't have an appeal to you. That's obviously different. Like you said, when you looked around, you didn't see entrepreneurs around you. You didn't have very many good examples of the like. The culture in the West is very much one of people are made to be worker bees, in obedience to authority and things of that nature. It's in the public school system. The public school system is actually explicitly designed with that purpose to make obedient soldiers and obedient worker bees, factory workers and the like. So it's not a surprise that you look around and you see people that are looking to take direction from others and work for somebody else. So what was the difference for you that didn't appeal to you? Because I've got to tell you, for me personally, I came to this much later in my life. I've always thought, I'm going to have a job working for somebody else. I was one of those people that was just normal.
Yeah.
So what was the difference for you, do you think?
Well, I think, first of all, I totally agree with you. I think that's exactly what schooling is like. Compulsory schooling is basically like factories for employees to turn out employees. So, I was definitely, I was in that atmosphere at school as well. I mean, it's really hard to tell what was different for me, but I personally think that it's to do with the unusual childhood that I had, because my parents split up when I was quite young. I was about 5 years old. And my parents lived in very different circumstances. So my mother lived in a hippie commune squat in quite a rough part of South London. And my father lived in a nice sort of middle-class neighborhood in North London. And so I lived, because my parents sort of shared joint custody, I went back and forth between these worlds, which were totally different worlds in terms of, how people interacted with each other and what kind of an environment it was and so forth. And I also ended up going to a lot of different schools. So I saw a lot of different social circumstances. And, a lot of those times were horrible, really rough times during some parts of my childhood. But what it did give me was it gave me a sort of a view on life that was from a lot of different angles. I could see different ways to live and different people living in different ways and different sort of social classes and communities and so forth. And so I think what my experience from that was that it threw a lot of things into question for me. Like, well, there wasn't really a set way in my family for me to go, because my family was already broken up, and it was in my mother and my father were in very different circumstances. So I sort of, felt that I had to work out for myself what my life was going to be about, what I considered to be the right way to live, and what I wanted to get out of life. And I think that's what led me to sort of look for other ways of living, and to look critically at the sort of messages that I was receiving about, what kind of work I could have and what kind of life to expect, but not just from my parents and my family, but also from teachers and from the media and from the culture in general and so forth. I think that I've always had quite a critical outlook on life, and I think that's come from early experience of just seeing the world from very, very different circumstances.
First of all, let me just say I'm so sorry you had to go through that. I know the end results may have been good, that you are a person to question authority and think critically and the like, but the route of getting there, of having your family broken up and moved around to different schools and the like, I wouldn't wish that on anyone. So, yeah,
thanks. I mean, it's actually, I think, for people, I was born in the 70s, and for people in my generation and onwards, it's so common. There's so many people who have had, maybe not common in the sense of having very different economic and social circumstances of one parent and the other, but just general kind of chaos and stuff happening within families. It's really common. But thanks anyway.
Yeah, the majority of marriages fail. So yeah, you're right. Having parents that stick together that's the minority now. Having a broken family is standard. So I guess if I'm understanding what you told me correctly, basically by having these two different worlds, and especially one of them, the hippie commune is one that kind of turns its back on culture, mainstream culture, and that's not how we want to do things. We're going to do things our own way. You didn't necessarily have this programming of this is what a good little boy is supposed to look like. This is what a family is supposed to look like. You fit into society in this way. You follow what the cultural programming is.
Yeah.
Am I understanding you correctly? Is that kind of how it happened, do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I think the other thing is that the squat in South London was, my mother was a communist, and so were most of the people around me. And so I was surrounded by people who had a very critical view of society, and who sort of, I was hearing messages about how this society, there needs to be a revolution, and the revolution needs to change everything. And, this society as it stands isn't legitimate, so to speak. And so I was hearing that in one circumstance, and then I was hearing whole different kind of messages in school, and different kind of messages at my father's place, and at my aunt and cousins' places and so forth. So I was hearing very, very different messages like that. And, for being around, and that was kind of an interesting experience, because, being around communism is a little bit like being raised in a religion, in the sense that there are, in fact, it's a lot like being raised in a religion. There are sort of like holy figures like Karl Marx and Lenin, and then there's this kind of apocalypse thing that's going to happen with the revolution stuff. But it's also a little different from religion in some ways, and it specifically sort of talks about society and the economy and social issues and so forth. So I think being around that environment, and my eventual sort of critical view of that whole worldview, when I came to criticize it and understand the problems with it and the immorality of it as well, that also helped me to really form my own view about what I wanted for myself and what I considered to be a positive and productive, constructive way to live.
Yeah, I would say both religion and communism, they're religions based on self-sacrifice. It's just one you sacrifice to God, you sacrifice in this world for the next life, and the other you sacrifice to the community. And they're very much like the ascetic monk kind of, that's like the pinnacle, where you just shun wealth and shun having nice things and taking care of yourself. Selfishness, that's a vice.
Yeah.
And sacrifice is a virtue. And I could do a whole show on that, and I probably need to at some point, of just how tragic that is of a mindset. Very interesting background for sure.
I was just thinking, one of the thoughts that comes to mind as you're saying that, you know what's interesting about communists and Marxists is that, you know, there are some things about that worldview which are fundamentally true, just not quite in the way that Marxists themselves think. So, for example, the idea that history is a history of a struggle between exploited people and those who are being exploited, and ideas like that, you know, there is a lot of truth in that. It's just that, unfortunately, the idea got applied to, for example, Marxists apply that to the idea that entrepreneurs are exploiters, when actually I think really the exploitive people in our society, the people who run the state and cause wars and are the root of violence and so forth. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, you know, you can always find in being in amongst people with those kind of views, you can find in criticizing those views insights yourself, and that's at least was my experience. That I came to realize that that whole worldview was like an ideology, and it wasn't really true. But that nonetheless, the whole process was a useful one, because there are some aspects of it that I found useful in sort of coming to my own understanding of how the world works.
The way I look at it is voluntarism. When you have a voluntary exchange, that's a virtue. You're adding value to the world. And what better example of that than a businessman? You know, if I just take a simple example of a farmer who brings his wares to the farmer's market, and, you know, I go purchase some apples off of him. I want those apples more than I want my $2, my $5, whatever. He wants the $5 more than he wants the apples. We're both happy after that exchange. We both came out better on the other end. When it's voluntary, it's a win-win situation, and we're both leave the situation better. So businessmen who their business functions through voluntary exchange are making the world a better place. Now, it's when coercion comes in, and the businessmen that use coercion, like using lobbying the government to pass laws to force people to do things, whenever this coercion comes in, that's where it makes life worse. Because obviously, if you're having to be coerced to do something, somebody's having to threaten you to do something with violence, you didn't really want to do it. You didn't want to do it because you would be worse off afterwards. If you were going to be better off through the exchange, they wouldn't have to threaten you with violence, right? So it's very clear that you're worse after this exchange. And so where the communists miss it is that you're just upping the ante of coercion, where you make now, you know, government's bad enough when it has some limits on it, where it can coerce you to do this, that, and the other. In communism, we're saying, okay, we're removing all the limits. Government owns everything. And now you're completely at its mercy. And of course, you saw just how catastrophic of a failure that was in the Soviet Union, and you know, just how grindingly poor China was before they started to take some of those chains off and allow some more free markets. I mean, just the low standard of living, the grinding poverty, that the inefficiencies of that, it's just so tragic. So, you know, we could definitely do whole shows on that, and I probably have done some whole shows on that in the past summer. I did a whole series on Henry Hazlitt's book, Economics in One Lesson. Yeah. Me and Steve Patterson did a series on that very early in my podcasting days.
That's a great book.
Right.
You know, just one last comment on that, though, that I think what was also kind of interesting for me is that because I was raised or grew up among hardcore revolutionary communists, I grew up, I mean, another way of describing that viewpoint is simply to call it the political viewpoint, right? Those people who hold those views believe that something needs to be done, and the way to do it is to use force, because that's how you're going to get change happen in this world. And that's, you know, we know what's best, and we know where we want to go, and we're serious enough about it to do by any means necessary, you know, revolution, etc., etc. And that's like the most extreme end. But in a sense, when you hear those kind of opinions voiced, it gives you a very pure understanding of what the political viewpoint is. Because somebody who wants to take part in politics in general, they basically hold the same views that, you know, things need to be done, and we're going to use force, and we're going to get everyone, we're going to use the state to force people to do what we think's best. that's the same view. It's just often couched in more sort of like in softer language. So I think actually really the important difference is between believing in politics and believing in voluntary, peaceful cooperation, interaction, trade. And that's sort of that was where I got to in terms of understanding what I wanted out of life and how I see the world, is that I came to the view that it doesn't matter what political viewpoint you take. Ultimately, they all boil down to, I know best, and that I'm willing to use force to force others. And that is the political approach, as opposed to the approach which says the only fair and just and moral way to do things is by negotiation. If you want things from other people, you have to negotiate with them. You have to try and persuade people. And that's the root of entrepreneurship, and that's the root of free trade and voluntary exchange and free markets, is to say, how can I provide value to persuade you to trade with me, or for us to do this project together, or whatever else it is that I want in life from other people. And that, I think, is the only fundamental difference that matters in terms of politics, is whether you are political or whether you're not. And I came to the sort of myself I came to view politics itself as illegitimate, the whole enterprise of politics as being illegitimate, and that the virtuous way to live, as I understand it, is to be consistently for voluntary interaction and to use persuasion and negotiation in all relationships, and that all life can work on that basis, that we can solve all social problems in using voluntary means.
Yeah, that's a really excellent point. I've mentioned a few times on the show before, the government, it's a reflection of the family. You get whatever you have at home. The way that people raise their children is predominantly authoritarian. You command the child has to do what the parent says. There's no negotiation or things of that nature. And even sadly, among adults in the marriage, rather than negotiate, they use other tactics like bullying or maybe some passive aggression or other ways to get their way than negotiation. So that's why I think you see the majority of marriages end up failing, because at some point people say, I'm sick of, for me to get my way with this person, I have to win an argument, I have to bully him around. I'm doing things like withholding sex or whatever.
Yeah, it becomes a power struggle.
Right, it's warfare. So people end up leaving. Of course, the kids don't have that option of divorcing their parents, so they're stuck underneath a tyrant until they're old enough to move out. And then, of course, whenever they get together in larger groups and say, how are we going to organize society, it's going to be what comes natural to them, which is to dominate others. And so the key answer, like you had said, is just be consistent. That in peaceful negotiation, that's the key for happiness at all levels, be it in your interpersonal relationships with a partner, with your children, having a wonderful relationship with your child and raising them to be healthy, happy human beings, or be it how you're going to organize society around you. Is it going to be with a top-down structure that you follow what those above you do at the point of a gun? Or is it going to be peaceful negotiation, trade, and those things? So, and not a top-down approach.
Yeah. And I just want to add to that point. I think one of the reasons we talked about school and people, going into a life of being employees, because school is like a factory for employees, but what you're saying about the family, I think, also has a huge effect on people's attitudes towards whether or not they consider themselves potential entrepreneurs. Because if you have parents who behaved like a crap boss, telling you do this because I say so and so forth, then you're going to go and look for crap bosses in your life afterwards, because that's what you're going to expect from authority figures. That's what you're going to expect. In fact, you're going to expect that you need an authority figure to tell you that kind of message as well. And so I think it's not just school. It's also, if those kinds of messages are within the family, and if people aren't using persuasion and negotiation with their children, then their children are going to grow up without having learned persuasion and negotiation. It's going to be that much harder to go out and do something like entrepreneurship. where you're forced very much to be negotiating, persuading for everything all the time.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I just wanted to say that you said schools are like factories for employees. Let me just correct that and say schools are factories for employees. That literally, when they were designing the school system, the public school system in the United States, the founding fathers of public education had meetings about it, and they said, we really like what's going on in the Prussian Empire. Their school system is designed to make soldiers and factory workers, it's designed to teach children to, sit at a desk all day and do repetitive tasks, to not be critical thinkers, to not question authority. Obedience and conformity were the two big virtues. They literally, explicitly said, this would be great. This will definitely get us soldiers and factory workers. Let's do that. This will make people conform and obey. It's that way by design.
Yeah, absolutely.
It sounds conspiratorial when you say that. It was a conspiracy, but it was an open conspiracy. You can go back and read their meeting notes and what the things that they were evaluating, and it's not like they tried to lie to the people about their intentions. They were very much saying, we like the Prussian system. Let's bring that home because it's very good at what we want it to do, which is, to make employees and the like. So it's funny, people talk about how bad the school systems are failing, how they keep getting worse and worse in the United States. And it's like, actually, no, they're doing exactly what they intended to do. That's if you believe the rhetoric that is out now, that they're designed for education. Yes, they're doing a poor job of education. The education level's dropping. But if you look at what they're really there for, I think they're doing a fantastic job.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Chris. That's a good point.
Oh, jeez. So let's see. How do we get to there from where we originally started? And should we even try is the question. So, because the conversation's going good at this point. Let's see. You had been raised with a split family. You've got more traditional mainstream on one side. You've got communism on the other. And I think it's interesting that in a commune, you've got a hippie commune, me being a voluntarist or an anarchist. If you like the ideas of communism, I think it would be great to just go off, you find other like-minded people, form your own commune and do that. As long as you're not using violence to inflict it on other people, I have no problem with that at all. If, right now there's the Zeitgeist movement. It's a communism with robots is what they call it, where they have, this central computer decentralized authority that determines how resources are distributed. And if you want to do that, that's fine. Find other like-minded people. There's clearly people that are behind it. Form your own little Zeitgeist town and go for it. Why do you need to inflict that on me? There's no reason at all to do that. And if it's really great, it's going to catch on and you're going to see more of them pop up. It's going to grow. They had that idea of, hey, let's get together and just do it. But then they wanted to take it to that next level of, we need to use violence to inflict it on others.
Yeah, my situation when I was a kid was a little more complicated because it was also in a squat, so it wasn't a building owned for the purpose of creating a commune. It was a building that was empty, that was then occupied, and those kind of situations. And you can never really set up anything long term in that kind of, or you don't really have the long term security of knowing that you can stay there. But yeah, if people do want to set up those kind of arrangements and they get themselves a place that they own and that they can do what they want in, then why not? They can, as you say, if it's voluntary, then it's nobody else's business if people want to live in a commune. It's entirely a matter of personal preference.
Right. So you came out of that environment. You decided, I don't want to have a boss. I'm going to start making my own businesses. And freeing yourself from that, having financial independence. I guess, is that how you would define financial independence? For you, what does that mean?
Yeah, and also just to say, I didn't come straight out of that knowing that I didn't want to have a boss. I didn't really know what I was doing. I just did lots of different things in my 20s, including lots of studying. But I did want to start a business, and I had the sort of vague idea of financial independence, but I thought of it just as making your own fortune and making your own way. And when I thought as I came to think about it more and more, the more I sort of came to understand it, what really interests me about financial independence is freedom, is the opportunity to live and do whatever you want with your time without having to work in a job that you hate and without having to do stuff that you don't want to do. And that doesn't necessarily mean being, living a high consumption rich lifestyle. In fact, the root of that kind of financial independence is frugality and is being able to support yourself because you have savings, you have investments, so that you have the freedom to do what you want with your time. So in the beginning, I had a vague idea of kind of starting my own business because I wanted to make my own fortune and so forth. But as I came to understand it better, I came to understand that what I really wanted was to be able to spend my life working on things that I truly feel passionate about, things that are really meaningful for me, and knowing that every day I can spend my time doing something that I feel is a great way to enjoy and cherish and make the most out of this incredible opportunity of being alive, as opposed to that sort of soul-sucking feeling when you work in a job that you're not interested in, where you sort of feel like your life is ticking away, And so that was for me what the really interesting thing about financial independence is not to do with what kind of toys you can buy yourself, or whether or not you can kind of be look down on other people within sort of the consumption culture that we live in. It's to do with whether or not you have freedom to live your life in a way that gives you true fulfillment, and that involves a lot of thrift and a lot of frugality to get yourself to that place where you're able to be financially independent. But the end game for me is the freedom, not the money.
So what you're saying is, to paraphrase that, for you, financial independence is basically, it's being able to do what you want to do, spend your time in the way you want to spend it, doing things that you love doing, that you're passionate about, rather than doing them because I need money.
Exactly.
Because I need a paycheck. And of course, the more frugal you are, the less you're into consumerism, the more of a minimalist you are, the less stuff you need to get by and be happy, the easier it is to do whatever it is you love and have enough money still to keep a roof over your head and keep a significant enough amount of gadgets around you to keep you happy.
Yeah. That's exactly right. Exactly right. I'll give you an example. I've never owned a car. I mean, that's a lot easier to do in the places where I've lived, like in the UK, and I've also lived in Mexico and in Germany and so forth. There are some places where that would be a lot harder to do. But in any country, there's always cities where it's easier to live without a car. And these days with car clubs and stuff, it's so much easier than it used to be. And so that means I don't have to worry about the car and the repairs that I might need to do and the insurance and paying to keep the thing on the road. I mean, I don't have to worry about any of that stuff. And so I make the choice not to not own a car. Not because I think that, there's something wrong with cars or anything. I mean, I think they're great. It's just I like not having the stress of having to plan for that expenditure. And the expenditures that I do plan for are ones that I think are going to bring me more freedom, as opposed to things that are going to weigh me down, So I don't think there's anything wrong with owning anything. And I love technology and I love gadgets and I love toys of that kind. But I think that there is always a trade-off to be made between thinking about, okay, well, how much do I have to work in order to support all this stuff that I want? And how much do I want the freedom to not have to ever go and work for people I don't want to work for, do stuff that I don't want to do? And that, for me, that's so much more important that I try to be quite specific about what kind of toys and stuff I spend money on.
Right. Doing something like not having a car gives you the freedom to just go, I want to go spend a few months living in Mexico. If you go to Mexico, you're not bringing your car with you, not from the UK.
Right.
Then you got to figure out where you've got to store it or what you're going to be doing with it. And then it's just that asset sitting there. Asset's not even a word I should use. It's not an asset. It's a liability.
Yeah.
Because it's costing you this money. That's a much cheaper way to live that lifestyle that you're doing and grant you some of these freedoms. I mean, you could still have a car and pick up and go to Mexico, but then it's going to require more income because of all those things that we had just discussed, the insurance, the buying the car itself, and then, if you've got to store it or whatever when you're gone, etc. And so it just makes it that much harder to be able to have freedom to get up and do these different things. And you had said you like to make a purchase based on, is this going to give me more freedom? An example I'm thinking of is I've got this desktop computer. I'm going to go out and get a new laptop. And that will give me the freedom to now, it's real easy for me to take my laptop with me if I want to go off to Mexico for 5 months or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And some people take this to a super extreme. There are some people who are really into the frugal living approach and who are sort of extreme savers, and they go really, really hardcore on it. And I admire that. I'm not even that hardcore myself. I don't consider myself to be like a mega frugal person. And because I focused more on entrepreneurship and on building a business and then selling a business, that was my route towards financial independence. But there are other people who just do it through saving. They just save more than 75% of their paycheck and live mega frugally, live a kind of absolute bare minimum kind of student style lifestyle, but for years and years, until they get to a point where they're able to support themselves from their investments just purely because they have been so ultra frugal. And that's one sort of route to doing it. I'm not even that extreme on that side of things. But I think it's a kind of mindset, though, that however hard you want to push it, it's just a question of being conscious of what money is for and what you want to get out of it. Because there's such a lot of, people either view money as being somehow evil and problematic and so forth, and or they view it as just an opportunity to kind of self-medicate from the stresses of life by going out and doing, shopping and buying stuff and so forth. Whereas, it's a tool and it's an opportunity to gain more freedom if you're conscious about what you want to get from it.
Right. Yeah, I'm reminded of Kevin Koskela, who, I know he's had you on his show and he's been a guest on my show. He's from the Freedom Lovin' podcast. He talks about how he doesn't own furniture. When he rents an apartment, he'll get one without a lease, or if it'll be like the lease will be no longer than what he was planning on staying. Like maybe he's like, I know I'm going to be in this area for 6 months due to this commitment I made. So I'm okay with the 6 months lease. But he'll find a place that's already furnished. And that way he's like, if I want to pick up and go to Thailand for a month, if I want to pick up and go here, wherever, and he lives all over the place. So
yeah,
it's such a free lifestyle. And really now more than ever, we're so fortunate with the opportunities that are out there to do this, with the technology and being able to have businesses that provide you with passive income and to run your business from anywhere in the world. We're having this conversation over Skype. I mean, it's absolutely free for us to talk as long as we want. I'm sitting here in North Carolina and you're in the UK right now, correct?
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's an amazing time.
Yeah,
it's such a great opportunity. As you say, if you can create an online business, then why not go and travel the world? Why not go and live in a place that's cheaper and gives you the opportunity to get away from cold winters if you want to, and go and enjoy and learn about other places and find out about how other people live in the world. It's such an amazing opportunity that the technology that we have now affords us. And Kevin's a good example. I've interviewed a few people who are effectively perpetual travelers. They travel the whole time, and they kind of live in one place for 6 months and then go to another place for 6 months. And it's been possible to do that for years and years. But there used to be such heavy sacrifices that you would have to do in terms of, it'd be really hard to stay in touch with people and to get information about what's going on and so forth. Now all of that's so easy through the internet. But yeah, it's a great opportunity of the time that we live in.
Right.
And I'm certainly enjoying making the most of it and doing as much travel as possible.
Right. Yeah, that's just so fantastic. Yeah, with my job, I actually have a boss. I'm an employee. I work from home. And I set my own schedule. The hours are very flexible. And so I'm also a manager. So I have a team. Anything I don't want to do, I just delegate it. I only do stuff that I enjoy doing. So, I spend most of my time just talking to people because I enjoy that. I'm good at that, doing the negotiation pieces and keeping the relationship strong between our clients and coworkers and things like that. So I spend my time doing that, and anything that, if there's maybe like an interesting piece of new technology to review or to evaluate, I might do that. But if there's something that's not interesting or some kind of repetitive task or something like that, I always just delegate that. So for now, I'm content to work for somebody else, but it's my job is so different than what the majority of people who have a boss who are employees, that it's unique in that way.
If you enjoy it, then that's great. I don't think there's anything, there's no reason to leave a job if it works for you and if you really enjoy it. As you say, I think the problem is that so many people are in jobs that they just fundamentally don't enjoy. Right.
Yeah, I enjoy it. I have a ton of freedom working from home and setting my own schedule, having virtually completely flexible hours, and they compensate me really well. It's really hard for me to I'm totally not motivated to go out and do that initial work to get my own business set up because I'm happy. Yeah.
And the initial bit is also, it's really stressful and really hard work and really, and really difficult. So I definitely think that it's not something that, it's not really fun in the first stages, but it's exciting and rewarding and thrilling and fulfilling, but I wouldn't call it fun. It's definitely, there are huge challenges with being an entrepreneur. And there's also the really uncomfortable feeling of just totally sucking at what you do. When you start a new business, you're thrown into that position of really having no clue what you're doing. Even if you've done some preparation, you never know what you're doing, and it takes time to start getting feedback from customers and realizing what's working and what's not working and so forth. And you get that emotional challenge of being completely incompetent for quite a long time. And it's funny for me because I remember that feeling really well when I started my business, and now I've started writing and I've just published my first book, and I'm thrown right back into that same feeling again of being I have no clue about publishing and about promoting books and so forth. I'm learning it all for the first time, and I'm right back in that same emotionally challenging situation of totally sucking and not knowing not knowing what's going to work and what's not going to work, and it's that's a really interesting challenge, and it's also I think it's a real opportunity for personal growth as well. But if you have a great job and you're being well paid and you get loads of freedom and so forth, then it's a tough call. Why would you want to leave all that to go and put yourself in a super stressful situation with the high risk of failure and the living with sort of not knowing what's going to work and feeling incompetent until you finally start making things work? That would be a tough call.
Yeah, for me, my plan B is I really enjoy investing and trading in the financial markets. And so I've got a little nest egg I'm building up. I've got retirement accounts, but then I've got some that I'm building up to eventually be my paycheck.
Right.
Where this investment's just going to be my paycheck. And it's not there yet, but it's growing. And I've thought to myself, how big would this have to get? How big would my paycheck be from these investments before I would just be you know what? I'm not going into work anymore. I'm turning in my notice. And I'm man, it would have to get a lot bigger than what I would need it to be. Just because my current job, I feel like I have freedom already anyway. And I'm man, it would have to be just to the point where it'd be just ridiculous. I'm man, I really don't want to attend this meeting that I have scheduled, at 1:00 today. So you know what? Okay, that's it. I'm done. There's no reason to give it up.
Yeah, totally. It sounds like for you're sort of on the path that some people call unjobbing, in the sense that, if your job is just really a lot of fun anyway, then there's no problem because, it's not a huge sacrifice. Obviously any job, even jobs that are super fulfilling and great, have the odd crap task that you just don't want to do, but you need to, in order to keep the thing going,
Yep.
And there are, I find it really fulfilling to write and to do podcasts, but there are some aspects, as we were talking about earlier, there's some aspects of podcasting that just aren't fun, of working out how to get audio quality when you've got a problem on a recording and so forth. But nonetheless, if you're generally in a situation where your job gives you fulfillment and you don't feel like you're wasting your time and you don't feel like your life's slipping away and you feel like this is a meaningful way to spend my day. I'm doing productive stuff and I feel like I'm also, I can see myself progressing from it and so forth. Then that's, there's no real incentive to try and push to get out of that job. And I think also it's quite a rare situation because I think a lot of people don't feel that way about their jobs.
Right. Yeah, and I suppose one of the things that helps to keep me in this position where I'm completely unmotivated to leave my job is my wife has a job where she's a scientist and she loves it. Again, she's loves going in. And I asked her that. I'm like, if we won the lottery, I don't play the lottery, but if I did and we won and we just didn't need money, would you keep going into your job? And she's like, yeah, I would. She's like, I don't know that I would work 40 hours a week, but I would see if I could get a part-time job. She goes, because I just enjoy it. And this is what I love doing, science and doing these experiments. So because there's a lab to go into, her job doesn't have quite the freedom that mine does where I can work from home and set my own hours. And she certainly has, when she's doing experiments, there's time commitments and the like. But what that means is I can't just pick up and go to Mexico for 5 months. Where if something were to change, or she decided, you know what, maybe I want to do something else or whatever, not that I see that happening, but if that were to happen, the door for travel, that might be something that I would then say, okay, maybe I do want to explore quitting my day job kind of thing. Because, even though I could work from the road, I occasionally do have to go in the office. Actually, what would probably happen if that scenario were to occur? Where, my wife was ready to give up her job and just start traveling the world, and she's like, come with me. I would probably approach my employer and say, I work from home. Occasionally I have to go into the office, maybe 2 or 3 times a month to go in for a meeting. But video conference works really well. Would it be okay if I continue working, but I'm on the road? And see if that would be acceptable to them. But if it wasn't, that would be the point where I might step in and say, yeah, you know what, traveling the world and doing what Kevin Cascella and my good friend Jake DeSillis, what they're doing, that sounds really cool. I would like to do that. And that might be the point. But right now that's kind of off the table because my wife and the job that she loves doing requires her to be in one location for, she gets a lot. We both get a lot of vacation as well. So we still travel a ton, but we're not traveling 6, 8, 12 months out of the year. You know what I mean? But if that were to come up, that would be the one thing that might get me motivated.
Yeah. And I think, in any employment situation, the potential room for negotiation is always massively bigger than it appears on the surface. And I know this from both sides, from having been an employee, but also having been an employer. If somebody is really good at what they do, and if they are providing real value to your business, you'll do anything to keep that person, And so, for example, it may be that it would be extremely inconvenient and a hassle and pushing your boss outside their comfort zone for you to be working from Mexico or something like that. But it might be that if you've demonstrated over a long period of time that you're really providing so much value that they're willing to say, oh, okay, well, I hadn't thought of this and it's not convenient, but if it works, then it works, And so I think there's even within employment situations, there's always much more room for negotiating solutions as long as they're win-win, as long as, there's an opportunity to find out a way that you can continue providing all the value, but, there's also potential for more flexibility because you're going to be in a different time zone, or you're willing to do it because, you'll be traveling, so you're willing to, not get the bonus that you were getting, whatever it is, right? There's always an opportunity to find ways to make it work and for there to be incentives for the person who's employing you as well. And so I think it's, and just thinking about your wife, I can imagine there could be situations in the future where maybe there's opportunities for her to go and work in another lab in another country somewhere.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And then you could, that would be an opportunity that she could still do the science, but you could go and, I don't know, find a lab in Australia that she could go and work with them for 6 months or a year or something like that. So I think it doesn't have to be an employee and be stuck somewhere, or be an entrepreneur online and go and travel the world. There's always lots of potential wiggle room and opportunity for negotiation. It's just that most people are not comfortable with negotiating and with actually, with trying to find a way to get their boss's needs met and their own needs met in a way that is win-win. And so, that's my take on it for people who are thinking about this is you don't have to become an entrepreneur. You can look at ways of getting more freedom as an employee. And in fact, that book, I think the 4-Hour Workweek has got like chapters and chapters on negotiating more freedom within your own job. And Tim Ferriss takes a pretty confrontational approach to it in terms of the way that he approaches it. But there's another example of ways to negotiate more freedom within your work and to negotiate working from home and so forth.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, there's always alternatives out there. Like you had mentioned, working for another lab, doing like the exchange programs, because I know that the lab she works at does do things like that, where people from another country will come work for a year. There's a lot of opportunities. You're limited only by your imagination and your skills to negotiate.
Right, exactly.
and how valuable you make yourself to your employer. The more valuable you make yourself, the more you bring to the negotiating table. So they're going to want to work with you to keep you on because you're such a kick-ass employee.
Exactly.
Now, one thing I'd mentioned was, for me, my plan B is my investments. And I know you had mentioned investing as being one variable in your financial independence tool bag. For you, how do you view investing fitting into the financial freedom toolkit?
Well, the way that I view it is, given the world that we live in where central banks can print money whenever they want and the interest rate doesn't really reflect what's going on in the economy, you can't, unfortunately, you have to invest. You can't just leave your money in a bank because inflation will either eat away at the value completely, or the bank itself, it potentially won't give you back your money and so forth. So basically, the way I view investing is kind of as a necessity from the world that we live in. And I think because I come from an entrepreneurial background where I took a lot of risks in starting a business, actually, I borrowed a lot of money to start the business, and I paid it back, and eventually, the business worked and everything was really good. But I actually have quite a conservative approach to investing in comparison. I'm not an active investor. I don't go out and speculate on investments because I consider that to be a job in itself. And I don't want another job. I'm quite happy doing the work that I am doing in terms of writing and so forth. So what I do is I follow an approach to passive investing that was developed by the libertarian investment advisor and libertarian thinker Harry Brown, called the permanent portfolio.
Oh, yes.
And that's an approach that is really designed to protect you no matter what happens to the economy, no matter whether or not there's massive inflation or massive deflation, whether or not there's economic growth or whether there's recession. And, it's I think, a really, really good way of benefiting from the growth in your investments that the market can provide whilst protecting yourself against huge potential risk and downside. And so I take that approach because, as I say, I think it's possible to choose investing as a job and to be, very much involved in the markets. But I don't want that to be my new job. I want to be able to do other things with my time. And so I'm very much a passive investor. But whereas passive investing, normally people just invest in index funds of stocks and maybe some bonds, the permanent portfolio also uses gold and cash as part of a sort of four-way split across different asset classes. And the basic concept being then that you are protected no matter what happens to the economy. Because I do also, I have thought a lot about the question of how good am I going to be at predicting what will happen in the markets. I've spent a lot of time reading about economics, and I know a lot about what causes economic booms and what causes recessions and what the cause of the current crisis that we've had since 2008 is and so forth. But even knowing all that, I know that I can't predict when inflation is going to kick in and whether or not it's going to go into hyperinflation. And I think that even if you understand the problems in the economy, human life and the social sciences are just not like the physical sciences. And consequently, you can't predict in the same way that you can with physical systems. And because of that, I consider it better to kind of not make it my full-time job to try and predict, but rather just get on with my life. That's kind of what works for me better. So I take that approach.
Right. Yeah, for me, I'm very active in my investments, but it's something I love doing. It's something I would love for that to be my job. It's a job I really enjoy. It's like, for me, the markets are a puzzle to be solved, and I love solving puzzles. It's really pleasurable for me. So, but for somebody who's not interested in that, that's not what they would enjoy doing. Yeah, it's tough. I definitely wouldn't give my strategy. I would point them towards something like what you do with the permanent portfolio, or Andy Craig has a book, Own the World, which is kind of based off of ideas like Harry Brown's The Permanent Portfolio and like the Gone Fishing portfolio and the like. These strategies where you are protected from a lot of scenarios, just about all scenarios, and it's very simple to understand and to operate and to not let emotions get in your way and cause you to fail in the markets in the way that so many people do, who they try to come in and be more active and end up being worse off than if they had just been passive and sat back and just blindly put their money into a mutual fund.
Yeah, and the statistics show that like the majority of active investors are worse than an index fund, and that's demonstrated to be true. That the majority of active funds where there is an investment advisor picking stocks and so forth end up not doing better than the market itself. And so that to me says you've really got to be good, and who's to say that you're not going to have a bad year when it really counts, So I think it's very much a question of whether or not you, as you say, whether or not you really love it and whether you enjoy it and you enjoy the kind of job that it becomes to be an active investor. And I would say the same is true for other types of investments. People sometimes think of property, for example, as being a kind of investment that they're going to buy their own house and then maybe they'll buy in a rental property and so forth. And to me, buying your own house is a consumption item. It's not an investment. It's you're buying something that you're living in. It's not really an investment. And buying other properties is also kind of a job. It becomes actually, if you want to do it, great, but I don't think that it's really as passive as it looks. And I think it's the kind of thing that if you want to do, it's best to treat it as something that you are going to take on as a new sort of skill that you're going to learn a lot about, and you're really going to become active as a property investor, and you're going to treat that as your job. And so for me, those kinds of things just take up too much time, and there's too many other things that interest me and excite me that I feel passionate about that I don't really want to get into. But if you enjoy it, then I can totally understand why you want to do it.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting because I think the real estate market, I think real estate in general is a much better investment than investing in stocks in the financial markets and things like that. Especially, I can't speak for the whole world, but in the United States, the tax incentives are so lined up in your favor for real estate that when you factor that in, compared to other investments, it's really one of the best investments out there. It probably is the best. For most people, it is the best investment. is to get not a consumption item like a home. Because you're right, that's a liability. If we're talking about your home, that's an expense. What I'm talking about is income, like a rental property of some sort. Or if you're, maybe into flipping, which that you're not necessarily getting passive income that way, but you're earning money. But I don't do any kind of real estate investment because even though I think it's probably better as far as the potential for making money, because I don't enjoy it.
Yeah.
I've looked at what is involved in that. And I mean, there are ways to do it where you can have kind of other people managing the property and you're just kind of supplying the money and maybe making some decisions here and there and you're not doing the work per se, but it's just, it's like that just doesn't sound like fun to me. I look at it and I'm like, nah, you know what? That's okay. It's not what I want to do. And I can get exposure to real estate through, there are different mutual funds or ETFs, and they call them REITs, Real Estate Investment Trusts, and the like. I can get exposure that way. The investment isn't quite as good as actually going out and getting all the tax breaks involved and having rental properties and the like. If the real estate market goes crazy like it did a few years back up into 2006 and like, you can get exposure to it through these other vehicles that trade just like stocks. It's really that kind of brings home what you were talking about, is that investing is a job. Really, it can be. And even if you're just doing what you're doing, it's really important to educate yourself and to know what it is you're doing. In the United States, especially people, if you're an employee, which as almost everybody is, you're thrown into the financial markets. You go there and they say, oh, well, as part of your package for being signed on, you get this 401k retirement plan, and your money's going in there, so you should probably take some time to educate yourself about what is going on with that money.
Totally. And the other thing that, for people who are thinking about investing, I completely agree with you. You've got to, whatever you do, even if you have a passive investment strategy, you've got to spend the time to understand what you're doing. And Harry Brown made the point in his books many times that you should never do anything in investing that you don't understand. And I think that is absolutely true, that you need to understand what you're doing, what you're investing in, so that you actually know what you're putting your money in. It's basically, it's like part of the responsibility of kind of looking after yourself is to understand what your choices when you're investing. And the other thing to really bear in mind, I think, is the potential for completely rip-off expenses in investing, that you have to be very careful to look at what the investment costs are, the expenses of being involved in any type of investment. And so a lot of the passive investors have take a very kind of low expense approach and try to really minimize their expenses, and I do that too. And I think it's one of the things that you can control in investing is to look at how much things really cost you. And so, I think you need to know what you're doing. You need to look very carefully at the expenses involved. Right.
And kind of tie that into what we were talking about earlier with the technology and the like, there has never been a better time to be an investor than right now. They have options for you to get involved and to invest with lower cost than ever seen before.
Yeah.
The brokerages and the exchanges and all these people, they have to make their money. They're going to charge a fee. You're going to have to pay a fee for this if you're in some kind of an ETF or mutual fund or whatever. But it's now with the technology basically made competition lower costs, because you can get online. There's all these online brokerages competing to each other, and you can, at a click of a button, you can do a Google search and, cheapest online brokers. And they'll come up and there'll be, third-party reviews of comparing the top 10 cheapest ones and which ones have the best features here, looking directly at the cost. Same thing with, any kind of fund that you're investing in. The spreads, it used to be if you wanted to invest, like let's say in commodities, you call up your broker and you say, I'm going long corn. The spreads that would happen on the floor, that order would go into a floor. Somebody would be on the floor of an exchange and they're all making their money,
Yeah, totally.
For those who aren't familiar with spread, the spread is the difference between what they're asking for it and what the person's selling it. And the people that are actually doing the trade, they're going to capture some of that spread, and you're going to end up losing that. You're going to end up buying it at a higher price than what you could have. You're going to end up selling it at a lower price than what you could have because all these people in the middle are making their money. Well, I mean, now it's online. The spreads are tiny. You still end up sometimes paying a spread, but I mean, like on a liquid stock, the spread is probably a penny.
Yeah.
If you're gonna buy shares in Coca-Cola, the spread is a cent. So it's as small as it can possibly be. So, I mean, the times has never been better to be an investor and to find ways to reduce your costs because it's just a Google search away to find the cheapest ways to do all of this. And because of that availability and that visibility of what costs you're paying, that competition has really driven down costs to the point now where they're just, I mean, orders of magnitude lower than what they were even, 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
It's good stuff. So, before I let you go, I brought you on to talk about financial freedom, financial independence. We went all over the place. Did I miss anything important that maybe you could just point the listeners to? Oh, we didn't cover this one aspect of financial independence. I've got a great podcast on it. Something like that. I can send some links to the listeners that are like, what are we missing?
Well, I did a video that I think summarizes different routes to financial independence that it has kind of maybe some of the other ideas around this, and it's called 4 Ways to Quit the Rat Race. And you can put a link to that in the show notes, or you can find that video on my About page of thevoluntarylife.com as well.
Great. I will go ahead and put that in the show notes. And speaking of which, so I'm guessing the best way to get a hold of you just be to go to your, the Voluntary Life website.
Yeah, that's right, thevoluntarylife.com.
Great. And if our listeners want to read your book, Becoming an Entrepreneur, what would be the best way to do that?
Yeah, you can find that also, links to that on my website. Just click on the tab marked books, and you can also find it on Amazon. It's called Becoming an Entrepreneur, How to Find Freedom and Fulfillment as a Business Owner. And you can search for my name, Jake Desyllas, Desyllas.
Awesome. All right, great. I will go ahead and put all that in the show notes. Jake, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Chris. It was great fun.
All right, take care.